As the global climate crisis accelerates in the 21st century, it has become increasingly apparent that human activities have inflicted widespread damage on the oceans. A quick Google search for human impacts on the oceans yields thousands of news articles and scientific studies, many replete with frightening statistics about the harmful effects of coral bleaching, ocean acidification, overfishing, and plastic pollution. These marine crises, as well as the many other environmental issues caused by human-made climate change, will undoubtedly have devastating, far-reaching consequences. Significantly, these disasters and disruptions will particularly impact today's youth, who will need to adapt to an increasingly inhospitable world ravaged by environmental crises. Given this unsettling reality, Carly Trott contends that empowering today's children to understand and take action on climate change should be an important goal, both to support children's agency and to promote present and future community resilience in the face of climate change impacts. New Zealand cartoonist Katie O'Neill's middle-grade graphic novel Aquicorn Cove takes up this challenge by using a gentle fantasy narrative to educate children about ocean conservation. Published in 2018, the comic centers on young protagonist Lana as she returns home to help her nameless coastal village rebuild after a devastating storm. There, she rescues an injured baby Aquicorn, a seahorse-unicorn hybrid creature that lives in a coral reef off the coast of the village. As Lana helps the village and the Aquicorn recover, she discovers that the village's unsustainable fishing practices have damaged the reef and endangered local marine populations. The graphic novel seeks to educate children about ocean preservation and inspire youth eco-activism in several significant ways. Most obviously, O'Neill uses cute, whimsical fantasy creatures to evoke sympathy for marine life in the implied child reader. Additionally, the graphic novel and its educational paratexts model global feminist environment justice, which Noelle Sturgeon defines as using an intersectional approach and revealing the connections between social inequalities and environmental problems to uncover the systems of power that continue to generate the complex problems we face. By drawing attention to the larger systemic issues threatening the oceans, Aquicorn Cove empowers children to engage in justice-oriented eco-feminist activism. However, I argue that O'Neill's portrayal of cutified fantasy animals and the inclusion of didactic paratexts also highlight societal tensions between adult desires to both educate and shield children from the frightening realities of environmental crises. First, the comic's primary narrative attempts to make children feel concern for threatened ocean environments by drawing from dominant visual tropes in children's media. Anthropomorphized representations of cute animals and fantasy creatures appear frequently in environmentally themed children's image texts, such as the animated film Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest, and David Weisner's picture book Flotsam. O'Neill employs this trope by depicting the rescued infant Aquicorn as a tiny, fragile, and seemingly smiling creature. Similarly, the comic portrays the wild adult Aquicorns as brightly colored, playful, and distinctly feminine animals. They frolic in the waters near the town, gift found treasures to Lana, and even let friendly humans ride them. At first glance, these adorable creatures may merely seem like an innocent attempt to appeal to the comic's implied female child readers. However, this cutification also has disturbing implications about the relationship between humans and the environment. As Sean Nagai observes, in its exaggerated passivity and vulnerability, the cute object is as often intended to excite a customer's sadistic desires for mastery and control as much as his or her desire to cuddle. Lana's interactions with the cute Aquicorns repeatedly blur the line between the desire to master and cuddle or protect nature. She keeps the injured baby Aquicorn confined in a tiny glass jar as she helps it heal, and at the conclusion of the comic, the humans attempt to safeguard the Aquicorn herd by exploiting the creature's labor to help sustain the village's economy. As a result, while the Aquicorn's cute appearance and Lana's role as an animal savior may inspire children to care about real marine life, the comic's depiction of the Aquicorn ultimately reinforces harmful narratives about human dominance over vulnerable nature. Moreover, O'Neill's use of fantasy creatures to invoke sympathy in child readers raises troubling questions about how comics and other media can educate children about difficult environmental topics without, as Kamala Platt writes, shattering a sense of hope without destroying the green and replacing it with gray. On the one hand, the Aquicorns seem to reflect adult anxieties about children's ability to empathize with the natural world, especially when it comes to less visually appealing or reviled creatures. By prioritizing the cute Aquicorns over the unnamed, merely decorative fish who sparsely populate the comic, O'Neill suggests that children first need to feel sympathy for cutified fantasy animals before they can extend that concern to real animals and plants threatened by environmental disaster. This reliance on the gentle fantasy facade underestimates children's capacity to grapple with frightening environmental issues and mystifies the grim realities and devastating scale of ocean acidification, overfishing, and plastic pollution. After all, the comic never depicts any dead or plastic-snared animals, and even the injured baby Aquicorn appears lightly bruised at most. On the other hand, by highlighting some of the ways that human activities have harmed the Aquicorns, and by extension, real-world oceans, the graphic novel does effectively teach children about the need for ocean conservation without invoking overwhelming feelings of eco-anxiety or paralysis. While this gentle approach may not fully educate children about the realities of environmental issues or convey the urgency needed to address mounting environmental crises, it may motivate some young readers to take action, or at least to learn more about human impacts on the oceans. In addition to the titular Aquicorns, the graphic novel also features a second type of fantasy creature that allows O'Neill to highlight the link between environmental degradation and social inequalities. Or, a blue-green humanoid sea creature resides in the coral reef near the village and serves as the guardian of the Aquicorns. Significantly, Orr and Lana's Aunt May were once involved in an interspecies queer romance, but they now clash over the village's fishing practices. In a series of darkly colored panels that stand out starkly from the rest of the comic's vibrant frames, Orr shows May the nearly empty, dying coral reef. The grim underwater tour concludes with an image of sea creatures behind a net, as Orr direly warns May, "Plastic nets have no feelings. They take everything and they never break. You have lost your connection to the sea. You say you only take what you need, but you seem to need more now." Functioning as a less shrill, sexier version of Dr. Seuss's lyrics, Orr explicitly links the reef's plight to human actions, denouncing the village's greed and apparent disconnection from the natural world. By contrast, May justifies the village's exploitation of the ocean by highlighting the economic necessities motivating their overfishing. She insists, "We have to bring money to the village or it won't survive." Moreover, she underscores the apparent powerlessness of small groups of people to enact meaningful environmental change, stating, "My village is a speck in the ocean. You're asking us to sacrifice our livelihood for what? Barely making a difference." Rather than simply vilifying the humans for destroying the reef, the comic emphasizes the tension between economic survival and environmental stewardship, a topic often conspicuously absent from children's literature. As Claire Echterling observes, by and large, green children's books are relatively silent on the topic of environmental justice, especially with regard to the unequal dispersion of environmental burdens on poor, marginalized communities everywhere. By approaching the villagers' conflict with the ocean creatures from an environmental justice lens, O'Neill invites young readers to consider how economic precarity and the disempowerment of marginalized populations contribute to the destruction of the oceans and the environment at large. Though May initially resists Orr's passionate plea for the villagers to alter their harmful behavior, Lana later realizes that the damaged reef no longer effectively shields the village from powerful storms. She convinces May that the human's survival depends on the ocean, saying, "I know our village is small, and we can only do small things to help the sea, but I still think we should do them. And if the reef dies, I think our village will die too." The comic concludes with the villagers vowing to set aside their plastic nets and return to the traditional, small-scale fishing practices used by their great-grandmothers, not their male ancestors, significantly. Additionally, May resolves to find alternative, more sustainable ways to generate income, stating, "It's time to see what our village can grow and provide for itself." And Orr said they would help us find other things to sell, things the Aquicorns make. By working together with the ocean creatures to generate income, the village plans to reduce its negative impact on the reef and return to balance with the sea. Read through an ecofeminist lens, this ending, as Alice Curry writes, invests agency in the natural world in order to argue for the necessity of transformative social and political action to reconceptualize humanity's relationship with non-human others, as a relationship based not on degrees of separation, but on mutually a gentle cohabitation. Of course, May's suggestion that friendly marine creatures will help to financially support the humans by producing goods is clearly a utopic fantasy that still operates within capitalist logics, rather than envisioning less inherently destructive economic systems. However, the comic's conclusion does effectively model what Platt terms in environmental justice poetics by promoting both environmental well-being and social justice. In other words, by portraying the villagers compassionately working with nature to develop mutually beneficial solutions, and by not magically erasing the very real financial pressures that shape human interactions with the environment, O'Neill encourages children to imagine more environmentally friendly, just futures. Significantly, the comic's positive portrayal of empowered queer women and women of color who successfully enact environmental change in their community may also inspire young readers from marginalized communities to participate in eco-activism. Finally, O'Neill also includes 3 pages of non-fictional paratexts that extend the comic's eco-educational, justice-oriented message. Primarily textual, with a few illustrations in the style of the primary narrative, the first 3 sections, titled What Are Coral Reefs? Where Can You Find Coral Reefs? And What is Causing Damage to Coral Reefs? Provide readers with additional factual information about coral reefs and coral bleaching. A 4th section, titled How Can We Stop This Damage? Encourages children to participate in eco-activism on both individual and community levels. Curiously, though, the paratext contains few explicit, actionable steps for readers to implement to help preserve the oceans. For instance, O'Neill urges children to consider what plastics or chemicals you may be putting into the environment in your day-to-day life. Consider supporting brands and businesses that are aware of climate issues. Of course, merely considering the environmental impact of one's own plastic usage or shopping habits will not help to combat the destruction of ocean habitats or climate change, but O'Neill does not provide any tangible solutions for young readers to implement. As a result, the paratext underestimates children's capacity to alter their own harmful behaviors and to adopt more green lifestyles. However, How Can We Stop This Damage does vaguely suggest a few ways that children can help to enact change on a systemic level. For instance, O'Neill tells readers that they should donate to organizations directly working towards marine preservation, though it seems unlikely that most individual children can make significant financial contributions to the cause, as well as tell politicians and businesses that any methods that harm the sea need to change. Additionally, O'Neill reinforces the primary narrative's environmental justice focus by cautioning readers that it's also important to make sure that local communities are still able to make a living with these changes. However, neither the primary narrative nor the paratext explicitly address the role that large-scale industries such as commercial fishing play in marine crises, and, like most environmental children's media, Aquicorn Cove does not explicitly invite children to build on their newfound knowledge by participating in large-scale public eco-activism. Instead, the comic's paratext takes a reductive approach to eco-pedagogy by, as Eckerling argues, positioning the child or young adult as apolitical, capable of activism and change only within the boundaries of the private sphere in their own lives, and perhaps even incapable of grasping the temporal, geographical, political, economic, and cultural complexities wrapped up in climate change. Ultimately, then, Aquicorn Cove falls short of its stated goal to inspire children to be guardians of the sea. The graphic novel and its paratext do successfully address some of the silences surrounding environmental justice in children's media and teach readers about issues impacting the oceans. However, the gentle fantasy narrative and the largely ineffective solutions posed by the paratext fail to empower children and reflect conflicting adult desires to both educate young people about the environment and to protect them from the terrifying scope of environmental crises. As a result, the comic points to the pressing need for more transformative works of children's media that recognize children's capacity to engage in justice-oriented environmental activism at a time when this engagement matters more than ever before.